Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Influence Economy podcast. I'm your host, Shayna Davis. I'm so glad you're here. But before we get started, I would love if you would do me a favor. So, wherever you're listening to this episode, I want you to take a screenshot. With that screenshot, I want you to post it on LinkedIn and tag me. And then I just want to hear your biggest aha moment or your biggest takeaway from this episode. And the reason why I do that is because not really because I care so much about download numbers or any of those vanity metrics, but what I do care about is that far too many leaders don't know how to cultivate and build the external influence that the new world demands. And so every time that these episodes are shared, it's going to expose people to the signals that they need to develop in order to lead better. So I'm going to read my guest bio and we are going to get started with what I know is going to be a great conversation. So, my guest today is a former behavioral science researcher trained in change management and adult learning. He spent over 20 years supporting mission driven organizations through change. His approach is grounded in motivational interviewing, specifically adapted for the practical, high pressure conversations that leaders face. He holds a master's in education from Harvard University. He's a faculty member with the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, a board member of Motivational Interviewing and Leadership in Organizations, a member of the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers, and a proxy certified change practitioner. I'm excited to welcome to the show Jeff Wetherhold. Sorry, Jeff Wetherhold.
Shayna, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You're welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. We're going to have a conversation that I think is really going to be able to help leaders as they begin to engage more outside of their organization. I was having a conversation with someone yesterday and I said, there's no shortage of information out there that teaches someone how do they communicate, how do they influence and lead well inside of their organization. But what I know is that in the time that we live in now, no one trusts anybody. They don't trust companies. There's all this tech disruption going on. And oftentimes, the way that leaders are representing themselves and representing their customers or their companies rather outside of the organization is what is going to determine whether or not companies are going to continue to get traction and if they're going to be one of the companies that wins in the next decade, or if the next bright shiny object that comes out 3 hours from now, people are going to take their attention off of your company and put it onto theirs. So I'm excited to have another layer of
Mhm.
conversation that can help prepare leaders for the external engagement that many of them are already facing or will begin to face. So, Jeff, where I want to start with this is talking about resistance. And oftentimes, when leaders face resistance from the outside, whether it's from a customer, an investor, like any public audience, they interpret that as pushback. So,
Yeah.
when they are receiving some level of resistance, what is that actually signaling? What is that actually telling them?
It's telling them that they have something important to learn. And I want
Mhm.
to acknowledge that I'm trained in the fields of change management and organizational improvement. We use this language of resistance all of the time, and I hate it. And I wish that we didn't use it, and I hope that I can help us use it less. Because
Let's do it.
resistance tells you very little. You don't learn anything actionable from that word. It doesn't tell you where to head next. People generally don't like being called resistant. So in that sense, it tends to be self-reinforcing, telling someone they're resistant or approaching them as if they're resistant. Well, it makes them resistant. It attributes intention to something that is often not intentional. It attributes malice, sort of personal will to something. And nobody changes to feel worse about themselves. So I try to encourage leaders to move away from this thinking around resistance and to approach this from a more neutral perspective. They haven't accepted change yet. What can you learn about why they haven't accepted change? And often, underneath of what people very comfortably call resistance to change, there's very important information that can help you follow through in a way that is both humane and specific and more time efficient than what you would have done otherwise. In, say, an organizational setting, one of the easy things to do is to just say, well, people are change resistant. We're going to train them.
Hmm.
When we know that for the 10 or 12 good reasons that people do not accept change, training addresses one of them. That's a phenomenal waste of time and resources and will. So when we move past this language of resistance toward listening for what's actually underneath of this that I can act on, we open up the possibility of intervening in ways that are sustainable and meaningful to the people that we work with and not putting them on the back foot and pushing them away at the very moment that we need to engage them and draw them in.
Yeah. I appreciate that perspective. Now let's take that outside of the organization because a
Mhm.
lot of leaders are having to engage externally, whether that's with a customer, maybe it's with a potential investor, maybe they're being interviewed by the media, they're representing their company outside of the organization. And oftentimes they're experiencing resistance to their messaging, or they're receiving
Mhm.
resistance as to how what it is that the company is doing.
Mhm.
So when they're getting that form of pushback, if you will, from an external audience, what should they be listening for? Because it has nothing to
Mhm.
do with them as the leader, but they're the one that is actually representing their company. So what should they actually be listening for when they're getting that resistance from an external audience?
Yeah. It's so easy as a leader to take it personally. And I want to acknowledge that and empathize with that first, right? You as a leader deserve the same empathy that I would advise you to extend to a client or to a staff member. It's hard not to take it personally. And it's okay for it to be hard. You identify with your brand, with your company, and it's an important part of your work to do that. With that said, motivational interviewing, which is one of the disciplines that I'm trained in and practice most, provides us with a framework for what we want to listen for. And it breaks it down into two easy things. We want to hear change talk and sustain talk. We could phrase that differently as motivation and demotivation, if you prefer. Change talk is any language that they express in the direction of change in their own words, their words, not yours. And sustain talk is any language that they express in favor of the status quo. Again, their words, not yours.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the first skills that I train people to do is to listen for both of these. And what they quickly find is that we're swimming in them. You hear both in every conversation you have. Often, you'll hear both in the same sentence. I should make this a priority, but I don't see it happening right now. They're both there. And what we know is that this matters a lot in terms of what we offer back. When we learn to hear someone's own motivation for change and someone's demotivation for change, then we can make ourselves capable of strengthening it. When we reinforce that, when we reflect back the language that they've shared with us, what we know from research that's done on applying motivational interviewing is that reflecting their change talk back makes them 11 times more likely to share more change talk. Reflecting their sustained talk back makes them 19 times more likely to share more sustained talk. So, two things to take away from that. One, you are an amplifier. You have a powerful impact on what they continue to offer, maybe more powerful than you've given yourself credit for. What you offer back has a profound influence on what they offer more of. And what we're doing in these conversations is understanding, can we help them talk themselves into change? If
Mm.
they have motivation already, the more they express that, the more they say that, the stronger they identify with it. These aren't our reasons from the outside, they're theirs. It's intrinsic motivation as opposed to extrinsic. So we know that whatever we offer back is going to have a powerful impact on what they share. But we also know that we're better amplifiers of sustained talk than change talk, right? 19 is more than 11. So we need to be very careful how we use that. That is our most volatile resource in some ways. We can't just ignore it. If you ignore someone's reasons not to change, or you can easily disengage, they can not trust you, they can assume you didn't hear them and just say it again, but louder. All of these things work against your best interest and theirs. So we want to acknowledge it, but we want to minimize the time we spend with it. And that's really the practice that we try to develop through speaking to change as a discipline. How can we hear those raw ingredients of motivation, change and sustain talk? How can we amplify those in ways that will help that person strengthen their own case for change? And how can we avoid spending too much time on the language that's going to demotivate them?
Mm. I want to make a practical application of that. I work with a lot of leaders that um, when they're engaging publicly on behalf of their company,
Hmm.
there's high stakes that are involved. Oftentimes, skepticism is high. I wish that they would not sometimes only be thinking about how they're going to communicate when it comes to crisis management, but it is what it is. When they're in a situation where skepticism is high and they
Hmm.
want to take this motivational interviewing into consideration,
Hmm.
what would an approach look like in a in a high skepticism situation?
Yeah. It's harder to hear the change talk when you hear a lot of sustained talk. It's harder to hear the motivation to change when there's a lot of skepticism. So we need to start with some easier cases to sort of build up that muscle. Like anything else, this requires practice. I think that's a really important takeaway for any of these skills. Knowledge alone, it's a starting place, but it's not going to change your behavior. When you're under pressure, when you're in the moment, you don't default to what you know. You
Mm-hmm.
default to what you've practiced. And those things are different. So we want to practice that because you're going to need to hear the little nuggets of change talk that are in there. You're going to need to acknowledge and learn more about that skepticism. Pushing back against it is going to be the wrong answer. That's just going to help someone dig in more. And this is one of the places where I try and draw on disciplines other than motivational interviewing to help leaders have better conversations. And one of the surprising ones that I spend a lot of time learning about and teaching leaders is political canvassing. Political canvassers know an awful lot about having someone else hear their viewpoint when that person has no obligation to hear it. They know a lot about how to get fewer doors slammed in their faces.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out leaders, metaphorically speaking, need to know a lot about how to get fewer doors slammed in their faces. One of the things that we know from the research on effective dialogue and political canvassing is that when you're having that kind of a conversation, when you're trying to do what I term as influencing with dignity, working with the reasons that someone has to change, we want to move away from their specific objections and toward their process for arriving at those objections. How did they come to feel that way? It's very easy for someone to stay in an emotional register and disagree with you forcefully when we talk about a difference of opinions. But when we engage at the level of story, how did you come to hold that opinion? Not only do we bring the conversation down a notch emotionally, but we have them engage with it in a way it's really more narrative. It's more front brain as opposed to midbrain, right? This helps them consider things that they might not otherwise consider. And it helps you as a leader learn things that you're often surprised we're there to learn. That's one of the practical skills that I think in these situations can be really helpful is to not push back the level of position. And we hear people say things like, well, facts don't change minds. This is what they mean. What changes minds? Stories, relationships, actions, all of those things can be evoked through getting to that process of how did you come to feel this way? We can take something that might feel more emotional and impersonal and make it more real and personal and give leaders ways to engage with that more substantively.
So I'm curious because I understand all of that conceptually,
Mhm.
but I want to make sure that someone listening to this who says, "Oh wow, I've never even heard of motivational interviewing
Mhm.
before." It I buy in to what Jeff is saying, but I want to make sure that in my next forward facing engagement on behalf
Mhm.
of my company that I'm actually able to implement this theory. So
Yep.
I want to go back to the example of let's take a leader. Let's just say that they are the head of engineering for a tech company,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of upset in the world right now,
Mhm.
and they have a tech solution that is going to solve this major problem.
Mhm.
And they're being interviewed by a media personality who seems to be very skeptical of the solution actually being something that is going to work.
Hmm.
Can you model for me or give a tip or shift
Hmm.
that that leader would be able to implement to make sure that they're integrating motivational or yeah, motivational interviewing
Hmm.
as an approach in a situation where they're being interviewed by someone who seems to be skeptical?
Yeah. I want to start by listening for that language of change, even if it's faint in those conversations. So I don't want to put words in an interviewer's mouth, but I haven't heard anything directly, so I'll do the best I can. Let's say they are upset about this. They're skeptical that your solution is going to solve a problem, but they're communicating to you in their language. That problem's important to them. It matters.
Mm-hmm.
They want a solution. There's change talk in that. They want this to work, but they've been burned by five things that looked an awful lot like it, and they're skeptical
Yeah.
that yours is appreciably different. So there's a lot of sustained talk in there. There's a lot of demotivation in there, granted. But there is also change talk. They want this to work. This problem matters to them. We can amplify that. It's really important that someone offers a solution that's different from what you've seen, and then sit with it. What's that interviewer going to say? It could go a lot of different ways. But when we get to a place where people are confident enough in this language to offer something very simple like that back, and then pause and not
Mm-hmm.
overtalk, what do they have to say? They're not planning for that. They're going to give you a more genuine response, and you're going to learn things that you never would have learned otherwise, and that you may not have known you had to learn. That's what gives you the material to work with. And that is what can help you as a leader avoid the trap of having a more superficial argument, which is what I think a lot of people will be inclined to do, and
Mm-hmm.
get to a place where that interviewer feels heard, where they feel acknowledged, but you're not dwelling on their objections. You're focusing on the reasons that they're sharing with you, even if they're faint, for why they want this to work.
One of the things that I would add to that, because I think that's great, and I would think that also this is a great time for storytelling to come into play
Mhm.
because more than likely, the company that you work for, I'm sticking with the same example, the company that you work for that has created the tech solution is very well aware of what is going on in the industry, where the industry is headed, what's going to happen, all of the different things that the leader probably knows as well.
Mhm.
And if you can tell a story about what is being built and how it's going to affect change, I think that sometimes
Mhm.
stories can help to lower people's guard,
Yeah.
which is why I find that it's highly important that if a founder or anyone on the leadership team that is going to be representing an organization, you already have to know what the stories are that can
Mhm.
be told. That's number one. But you also should have given some thought to what is your unique point of view around either the industry that you're in, where the industry is headed, what your product or service offers, because if the only thing we can do, especially when skepticism is high, is regurgitate what is on the company website or the three or four points that the comms person has had you memorize, the skepticism is not going to go down. As in
Mhm.
fact, it's going to go up. Trust is going to continue to erode. And so I want to make sure that people recognize that when you're communicating on the behalf of the organization, you can't
Mhm.
just be memorizing bullet points about the company because you're a person that is having this interview in this particular example. So have stories that you can tell. Be able to demonstrate your unique point of view about
Mhm.
what you're doing and where it is that you're going, because that's going to help anchor what it is that your company is building. And the person who is interviewing you or whoever is giving you this pushback, as we've been referring to it to today, is
Mhm.
likely going to lessen their guard a little. And because they're going to hear something that is going to make more sense to them than just what it is that they probably have already been read and prepared to attack you with anyway.
Yeah. You made two really essential points there. The stories are vital to this work, and you need to differentiate yourself. And I would just add, those things can be directly connected if you're doing this well.
I,
So we
uh-huh.
know that stories and narrative, there's this phenomenon in the behavioral psychology research, narrative transport, that describes how people engage differently when they're involved in stories. Stories tell us to slow down, to think about things that we might otherwise dismiss, and that is essential when you're having these conversations. But they give those assertions, those differentiations that you're talking about meaning. So I'll use myself as an example. I do a lot of change management work and communications work. I talk to a lot of leaders who are very skeptical of me because they've had a lot of people who look a lot like me come in and waste a lot of their time.
Mm-hmm.
I can't fight that.
Yeah.
I need to accept that and I need to work with that. So I can tell a story about what it's like to walk into an organization where they've had so much of their time wasted, where they've been sold so many easy solutions that haven't gotten to real impact, that they barely have the time for me. I can connect that to why my approach is different. Everyone else wants to sell you plans for how change should go. But really, what you need is to understand how to engage people in change that are disengaged. Here's how I can help with that. Now, all of a sudden, I'm not just differentiating myself in theory. I've grounded that in a story. I've made it relatable to them. I've compelled them to sit with that and pause and really think about it in a way that they might not. Is it foolproof? No, but it's
Mm-hmm.
going to be much more effective at scale than the alternative.
Yeah. Taking everything that we have talked about into consideration today, what is one question that every leader should ask themselves before trying to influence someone outside of their organization?
Oh, when we're influencing someone outside of the organization, we always want to be clear about our position and what we're influencing them toward. But there's a few essential conditions. You asked for one, though. I think we need to be clear who benefits from change and how.
Mm.
How does it benefit them? How does it benefit you? How does it benefit your organization? I think we need to be clear where we're focused on their reasons for change, how we're speaking to their problems, not the problems you think they hold in theory, how we're using their words to engage with that. That tells us that we're influencing at the level of intrinsic motivation as opposed to extrinsic motivation, that we're working with their own drive to change. And if we're looking for change to be sustainable, it's going to be change that's made because of intrinsic motivation. You're not going to extrinsically motivate them forever. It doesn't work that way. You're not going to live that long, and the work gets harder as you go. So, who benefits from this? What is my position? And how does this connect to the motivation that they've expressed to us? Even if the motivation is limited, if it's something like what that interviewer shared,
Mm-hmm.
right? Something should solve this problem. It can't be the 10 things that I've already seen.
Yeah,
Those are really important.
that's awesome. Well, Jeff, we're out of time, but I know you're such a wealth of knowledge that I know people are going to want more because we've only scratched the surface today. And so if people want to follow you on social media, where can they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn at Jeff Wetherhold, and I would be happy to answer questions or take any outreach there.
Awesome. And is there anything that you would like to offer if people want to take things further with you?
Absolutely. I would love to have a conversation or share some resources that can help you have better conversations about change. Maybe those are influencing, maybe it's guiding others to change that's important to them, maybe it's your work as a leader. So if you go to jeffwetherhold.com, you'll find more information on how I help leaders and organizations with these conversations. You'll find some resources there, and you'll find ways to reach out to me other than LinkedIn if you'd like to connect.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to make sure that the links to both of those things are in the show notes. So all people have to do is click. Jeff, thank you so much for being here today. I know that this episode is going to be a hit. The nuggets that you've shared are definitely going to help leaders in these external facing moments. So, everyone, please share this with every leader that you know that has to engage on behalf of their company outside of the organization. I hope that you will go back and listen to previous and future episodes as well. Have a great day. Bye bye.